Hello, and welcome to the Wild Blue Podcast, perspectives on aviation lives, lifestyles, and business.
Hey everyone, Todd Mitten. Welcome back to the Wild Blue Podcast. Chris Kirk joining us here. Chris, how are you today?
It's a fun day, Todd. I'm having a blast. You?
You're having a blast because you've spent a lot of money and that makes you happy.
Oh yeah.
I think that would be something our listeners might be interested in, want to hear about. So today it seemed like maybe a good idea to talk about some of the upgrades and things you've done to your wonderful Piper Saratoga, and it is wonderful. I mean, this is a nice airplane, and I thought we should hear about it. I think people can learn some valuable information from your experiences and so on. So what do you think about that? You want to talk about your airplane?
Sure. If I don't want to talk about myself, let's talk about my airplane.
Enough about my airplane. Let's talk about me is usually what I say. But anyway, so your airplane has an interesting history in that it was a low-time airframe when you bought it and low-time engine, but it had sat for quite some time.
It had sat. And there's a previous podcast, I don't remember how long ago it was, that I did just kind of highlighting some of the things that I was dealing with at the time and the process that we had started to go through. That podcast was probably a year and a half ago. If you look back on the list, you can probably find it. But so we bought this airplane in September of 19. Yep. And you went up there with me one time to go get it, and the weather didn't work out, right?
Yeah.
But I bought it from a gentleman that bought it new from the factory. It's a 94 Saratoga 2 HP, so the normally aspirated version. And in 2019, when I saw it, it had a total of 330 hours on it, airframe and engine. And so the man that I bought it from, really nice guy. He just life events. I think there was maybe some medical stuff, but he had kids and they were busy in scouts and they were doing all these other things, and he just didn't fly it. And so it sat in his hangar for a long time. Well, he decided that he was going to sell it, and it sat for 10 years, I think, really between annuals, maybe a little bit more. And so he decided to put an annual on it, get it flying. That's when I came into the picture, looked at it. It was actually an airplane that we were going to sell at Wild Blue. And my wife and I have been looking for an airplane, and I looked at this one. I thought, if we can get it for the right price, because there's going to be a lot of hidden gems, if you will, with the airplane. We're not sure what these things are going to cost us over time. And he was agreeable to our terms, and so we bought it, just knowing that there was going to be a lot of stuff to do.
Well, the interesting thing about that, though, is that any hours that you got out of that existing engine were going to be, I'm not going to call them free hours, but that was a good thing. And the more you got out of it,
right,
that engine, the better off this particular scenario was. And I think, how many hours ultimately before you did the stuff we're going to talk about in a few minutes, how many hours did you fly the airplane over the course?
So we got about double the time. So I think we put about it had about 660 hours on it when I sent it in. So we got about another 330 hours out of it over the course of 3 years. Does that sound right? 3 years, I think. So we were flying a little over 100 hours a year. And then that's when, actually a little bit before that, we kind of knew this was going to be coming because we had seen the inside of the engine, and, there was some pitting on the cylinders, and, we were doing oil analysis and watching things very closely and, checking the oil filter. And about, about 2 years ago from right now is when, simultaneously, we started seeing some elevated numbers on the oil analysis, and then cutting the filter open, I started seeing stuff in the filter.
Right, and that is an important point to make, though, that this was not a haphazard operation. You had planned to watch things closely, and you did, and I think that gave you the confidence that the engine was good up until you felt like, okay, it's time to make the change.
Right. Because when we first got it, we were doing oil changes because, it just needed to be cleaned out. I think the first 3 oil changes, I did them at 10-hour intervals just to let the engine kind of clean itself out. And then we started, I don't think I've ever gone over 30 hours. So most of the time then I was doing 25-hour oil changes. We were watching it pretty closely. The plane gets flown, unless the weather was really bad. It gets flown pretty regularly.
Right. And I think that made it a perfect candidate for an Iran. Essentially, it didn't need to be overhauled, but parts of it needed to be upgraded. And so it really was a perfect. Sometimes we're not huge fans of that from the airplane sales side of, if a guy's got, I don't know, like 1,700 hours on an engine and then wants to top overhaul, it doesn't make a lot of sense. But when you're at this airplane was in this situation very, it was legitimately at the right point to do what you did. So.
It was at the right point. Yeah, and it's one of those things you be a Monday morning quarterback on and think about, should I have just overhauled it all or whatever? But what we have to take into consideration is we were going through COVID and all the supply chain issues, and we couldn't get new cylinders at all. And so I was kind of against doing a full overhaul if I had to do overhauled cylinders. I really wanted to do new cylinders. And then that elevated the cost. But we were just kind of balancing what the realities of the time were, how long it was going to take to get things. And so the Iran, had a 11 or 1,200 hour engine, I think the overhaul would have made more sense. I don't think an overhaul where we were would have added a tremendous value to the airplane. It was still only 600 some odd hours. So, again, it's easy to be a Monday morning quarterback and say, well, I would have done that, or well, I would have done this. I think if I was to do it all over again, with the reality of COVID, I'd probably do the same thing. If COVID wasn't there, I probably would have been more inclined to just do a full overhaul.
Oh, really? Okay. I did not know that.
Yeah, it's, and I say that in retrospect just because of the amount that it cost. The engine, they did just about everything to it. We had the cylinders overhauled. We had them nickel plated. So it's got new pistons and assemblies there, new camshaft. They took the cases out and overhauled the cases. I think the crank was about the only thing. It got inspected, but it didn't get overhauled. And so there were a few little pieces here and there to qualify as an overhaul that would have had to have been done. And it was probably, in retrospect, maybe another 15 to 20 grand that it would have cost. But, I've got an engine that, we have no intention of selling the airplane. That may change tomorrow, but today we don't. But now I've got an engine that's got a new top end, it's got a new cam, it's got a lot of stuff going in. At the same time, we replaced the starter. I put a Skytech starter on it. Put a brand new alternator on it. We did at least one of the mags was already new, and we replaced the other. So it took advantage of doing a lot of those things. I know there were several other things we did to it too, and I can't remember. But and on top of it, this engine it was done by a company down in Tulsa called Barrett Precision Engines. They do a lot of air show performers engines. So they're pretty used to doing kind of tight tolerance engines. They've got a dyno that they run the airplane on or the engine on. But what I like most about it is this thing is putting out some serious torque. So before I was routinely seeing 155 knots true. And I keep a log everywhere we go, just a manual log, so I can look at stuff. And now it's not uncommon for me to see 163 knots true, and I never would have seen that before.
Well, I will actually verify that Chris writes down the true airspeed, and several other parameters every flight. I actually think he does this because when I'm not there, he has to stay awake on his own, which is not easy for Chris to do in an airplane.
Yeah, that's why I want Erica to get her license. I want to take a nap, man.
Yeah, I know how you are. But that, and I do want to add that I never mind seeing you spend your money. I think it's an important part of this. No, but this just made sense to me as it was at the time. And what is the TBO on that engine?
It's a 2,000.
It's 2,000 hours.
Yeah.
I mean, you're years from worrying about anything, and I don't wouldn't think you wouldn't get anything but good performance all the way up the way you keep it, oil changes and all the stuff that you do, which is a smart way to own an airplane.
Yeah, it's just, I've always believed if you're going to have an airplane, spend the money on it, but make sure that you have the ability to do that before you get into it. So many people, you and I talk about these people, we've dealt with them for a long time, that get into an airplane because they can afford it, but they don't necessarily look at the long-term ownership costs, and it's not it's an A36, a Saratoga, an SR22, they something like that. They're not necessarily cheap airplanes to maintain.
No.
I mean, I fly the airplane 110 or 120 hours a year, and I figure with hangar insurance, operational costs, maintenance, and everything else, that I'm spending without an engine event like this, I'm spending probably $45,000 a year on this airplane. That's not insignificant. And then you take an event like this, where when it was all said and done with all the components. Oh, I think the other thing I put in was a GI 275 engine monitor, and put gammies on it, and I had the prop overhauled. Just put a new power pack on the gear. There's just very little that hasn't been done on this airplane. And I think all said and done in the last year with this stuff, I'm pushing probably $82,000 just separate from all that.
Which I think our listeners probably like. I mean, it's good to hear, and it's not always comfortable mentioning numbers like this, but it is important because it helps you understand the cost of owning a high performance 6-seat airplane, and you do maintain it very well, and you're obviously you research where you go, but price may not be the number one factor of why you like. Maybe there's a cheaper place to go, but I think that you do what you think is going to keep you and your family in the most safe.
And I think most people kind of look at it that way. I want to feel good. I don't want to make any excuses. As Eric and I just took off last week, and we put 10 or 12 hours on the airplane last week, went down to San Antonio to see some friends, and spent a couple of days at the hangar hotel there in Fredericksburg, and flew home, and not an issue with the airplane at all. Over the course of 6 days, and man, what a lot of fun. It was just.
How many hours have you put on it now since all this work was completed?
Well, I put 42 on it just since the beginning of this year.
Okay, wow.
So we've taken it down to Florida already once, and been down to Texas 2 times, and done what have I done? 3 or 4 different Angel flights with it, which is another factor, so.
Well, so you're making up for the time because the dirty little secret is it was down for quite a while.
Oh man, it was painful.
Want to talk about any of that?
Yeah. Well, it was just we knew. I really thought, and this is just kind of naivete on my part, and then just just the reality of the COVID situation with the supply chain thing and all that. So the engine went in, or the airplane went in. Was it had to been the end of September, because that's when the annual expired. So the end of September of 22.
Yeah.
I really thought maybe we'd have the engine back and the airplane going by March 1st. Well, the engine, because of issues of trying to get parts and some of these places, I think the one that did the cases was really backed up. We didn't get the engine done until June. Went back on the airplane, and then we had a couple little things we had to get tweaked, and so it was a year almost before I had that airplane back, and then we had to have just a little bit of warranty work done on the engine, and then that's when I decided to do a couple other things to it, and so it's never just one thing. It seems like it's like, well, while it's in, let's go ahead and do this, and let's go ahead and do that. And so it was gone for a while.
Well, you're making up for it now, though. But
yes,
it's nice to get in there and think and have the full confidence in the airplane and all the other components. Like you talk about the gear, motor, and it just seems like it's still a great airplane. I mean, it's still a low time airframe, 700 hours.
700 hours on it now.
Yeah. What's the next trip? What's the plan?
I don't know. We were just talking about that. It's filthy right now. I keep the plane so clean, and we flew and landed there in Fredericksburg on a wet runway, and of course just dirt, not dirt, but just just dirty water and stuff all up underneath the wings. Now I got to get out there and clean it all
Hey,
up.
you shot the full RNAV approach.
Yeah, I did. It was kind of fun. I've got, and it's another podcast I think we've done or will do, but, I've got pretty high personal mins. For as much as Todd and I have flown, the one thing that both of us have learned is that I want to speak out of turn for you, but I don't think either one of us are super comfortable taking a single engine airplane down to IFR mins on every approach. And it just, to me, it doesn't seem prudent. I see guys doing it, and most of the guys that do it don't necessarily have a lot of time or I probably would have done it when I was younger, but it's just not worth it to me. So pretty much wherever I go, I want to have basic VFR. I want to have 1,003. So if I have to come popping out of the clouds with an engine, without an engine, at the very least, I can try to make a quick decision and land. But in this case, we had that. In fact, we waited in San Antonio to take off to where the weather got high enough. And then the minimum vectoring altitude is 5,000 feet, and so we flew over there at 5,000 feet in the soup the whole way. And so had to, it's a non-radar environment, had to shoot an approach.
It's non-radar.
Yeah, the whole RNAV thing, so everybody's stacking up, waiting for the guy to go in there and cancel IFR and all that. And so that was a lot of fun. We still popped out at 1,000 feet above the ground, but it was kind of neat, and Erica loves that. We pop out, and there's the runway in front of you, and that's kind of cool.
So that's interesting. I didn't know. So you had a almost really old school experience there, not like we do in the airline world. But
right.
That's pretty neat.
Well, they were all over me to cancel, but the thing was to cancel and be legal with the 500 below, all that cloud clearance stuff. We ended up having to be on the ground because I couldn't reach center, and then I ended up having to call them because none of their ground control frequencies, their remote outlets were working. And so, I think somebody had to wait on us for a little while because I'm, shut down and I'm fumbling on my phone trying to call Houston Center to cancel with them.
So if you were flying into Fredericksburg, Texas on
Wasn't me.
You know who to talk to. Call Chris. Well, that's exciting that you're using the airplane like that again, and I guess you'll have to figure out where the next get that thing cleaned up and do the next trip. Let me know where you're going.
Yeah, we definitely will.
Somewhere. I would like to go. So you mentioned that you replaced a couple of accessories when you had all this work done. I think the starter and a few others, the gear motor, was it? And
that was just the last thing. Yeah.
Well, what was there things going on with each of these, or we're just doing almost like preventive, like starters? I mean, what was the story behind that?
So a lot of them were original components, and I'm not a big advocate of replacing things just because of time or whatever. But the starter, I wanted to do two things. Number one is, if you're an owner of an airplane that's got a IO 540 especially, that sometimes hot starts on those airplanes are a bear.
Right.
And so, that was no exception. So what I wanted to do was to get a starter that cranked a lot faster and hopefully could mitigate some of that. And it's actually worked wonderfully. The plane just is a lot better with hot starts right now. But the other part of it is it's a weight saving. So I think we gain 7 pounds off of that. So during all this process, our useful load went up by 15, 16 pounds, I think, which was kind of nice.
That's exceptional because almost always it seems like when people make additions or add to their airplane, they add weight to their airplane.
Yep.
And almost even you could say that with manufacturers. We've talked about this many times where the weight of these, where the useful load has declined because the weight of the aircraft has increased every year when these airplanes were built in the 60s, 70s, 80s, and so on.
That's exactly right.
Like Cherokee 6 is a classic example of that. An unbelievable load, and eventually got down to where the Saratoga, fixed gear Saratoga wasn't very good.
No, that's just it. So it's I think we've shaved off about 20 pounds since we've had the airplane with various things. But that starter shaved off about 6 pounds, and then we did the alternator. And again, some of the stuff, we fly IFR. We talked about it a little bit ago. I don't fly hard IFR in this airplane, but and I really don't like flying at night if I can avoid it. But the alternator was original, and so I thought, this may not be a bad time, especially since the airplane's down. My whole goal was to get this airplane done, and so that I don't have to keep taking it back for these little things. So even though it elongated the amount of time that it was down a little bit, I really wanted to prevent having to go back for this and that. So we did put a brand new alternator on it. The prop overhaul, the prop was running great. There was no leakages. We didn't have any problems with the seals, nothing like that. But at the same time, it was a 26-year-old prop that had never been off the airplane and never overhauled. And so I was just a little curious about corrosion and stuff that was in it. And I was halfway prepared to have to buy an entirely new prop. I've been researching, doing an MT 4-bladed composite, or just replacing what it had on there, or doing like a scimitar. But so it turns out he came back with high marks. I mean, the prop shop had nothing for it. It was in very good shape. We went ahead and overhauled it. And then Mike had told me, so I'll just throw a word out for Mike Wren. It's Wren Aviation down in Enid, Oklahoma. Mike's great, and he shoots me straight and very knowledgeable and takes his time, and he puts up with my anal retentiveness on a lot of this stuff, which is nice too. But Mike and I were looking at it. He's like, I think your hydraulic power pack, the gear thing, the airplane's gear held up hydraulically. There's a valve that isolates the pressure in the system, and it shuts off when the gear are up. But periodically, you'd see it cycling in flight, and then you'd start to see some indications that it was a little slow coming up. He goes, I think your power pack is kind of on its last legs. Let's just watch it. So sure enough, we got the airplane back the first of this year, and I took it somewhere. Was I up in Iowa or somewhere? Coming out of Kansas City, it took me 2 or 3 times to get the gear up, and then up there in Iowa, it took me a couple times to get the gear up. And I just called Mike. I said, Mike, let's get it in. And so we ordered a power pack, and that was just done last week and a half ago. And so now, that, and in the course of that, of course, you always open up a can of worms, right? So
Right.
They're out there and they're trying to bleed the system, and it's kind of a self-bleeding system, and they're raising the gear, and I'm watching it. The airplane's up on jacks, and there'd be this hesitation in the gear, which is partially normal because as the nose gear comes up, there's a hesitation on the main gear, and that's supposed to be there. But there was another hesitation that wasn't supposed to be there. We found out that air kept being introduced into the system. And they isolated the system and discovered, okay, it's got to be the right main gear actuator. So they took that actuator off, and again, original part. And the beauty about Mike and his shop is, a lot of shops would be, we're going to send that out for overhaul or whatever. Mike says, hey, I've got the parts here, I've got the seals here. We took it apart and we resealed it, and that was it. And you could see the decay on the old seals where it was sucking in air.
Oh, wow.
Put it on there, boom, like that. It works great. So, that whole charade between labor and the parts was just 6 AMUs, so just another little bit of money spent.
Just a little something going on there. Well, it's all fun and games until the gear doesn't come down. Yeah. That's the real.
Well, that's the beauty of that system. It's pretty rare that won't come down.
I agree,
but yeah, you're exactly right. It doesn't matter one way or the other when you got somebody in there with you, and they're watching this and they're going, why is it doing that? Why is it doing that?
Yeah. Well, I'm glad in that discussion that you mentioned Wren Aviation, Mike, because I do know you. I mean, again, that's in Enid, Oklahoma, and we're up in Kansas City, so it's not exactly handy for you, but it's worth it, and that's how well he's treated you. And I do know your business mentality is that people who are honest are the ones that you're going to work with, and so because that's the way you try to run business here. So, I mean, that's sometimes not what you want to hear, but it's what you got to hear. And he's, I think, been very fair with you.
Yeah, so. Mike's been great. He really has, and I like working with his team down there. And he's got some really cool people. And nice shop, and keeps the shop nice and clean. And if Mike says it, I can pretty much hang my hat on it.
So Trying to think what else I wanted to ask you about that's new and different with the airplane. I think you've
So we did the GI 275, the engine monitor. Did we
yeah,
talk about that? And then
and
the GAMEs.
yeah, we didn't mention that. I mean, I don't think. Maybe
Yeah.
briefly earlier, but so what's your thoughts so far?
Well, we're enjoying the heck out of it. It's been a great plane, and we were talking about this a little earlier. Just mentioning a couple of the, I thought I mentioned a couple of the components that I bought outside of the airplane, and some of the customer experience, customer experiences we've had with them. So we were at Oshkosh last year, and I've been looking for a desiccant of sorts to kind of keep the internal part of the engine dry, because I know that that's what had caused some of that issue in the cam and everything else, just the condensation from that engine sitting a long time. And so I bought the Dry Bot, which is I'm trying to remember the name of the company. They're out of Stillwater, Oklahoma, and it's kind of an automated desiccant. There's a lot of them that are a lot less expensive than this one, but this one has its own drying capability. So as soon as that desiccant material gets saturated, it has an internal unit that kicks on that dries it out and kind of expunges the moisture, and you'll see a little drop or a little running of water underneath it. So you got to take the oil dipstick out, put a tube in there with a cap.
Oh, is that how that works? Okay.
And it sits there, and you feel the end of it with your finger, and you're like, there's nothing coming out here. Well, I put it in my mouth because I'm like, I want to see if this thing's really blowing. Sure enough, I mean, it blew my cheeks out pretty quick, but it's not, you can't really feel it.
Huh.
And so it's a very low rate, but it blows it out, and then it comes out the oil breather and keeps that engine dry. And I wanted to be able to do that. And those guys were great to work with. They had a few supplied. I think what happened is they had a lot of orders, probably more than they anticipated. But that unit was $1,100, I think. So I tell everybody my airplane looks like it's on life support because I got the Dry Bot hooked up. I've got the Tannis heater hooked up. I've got the battery minder hooked up, so I've got 3 extension cords going out there to the airplane whenever it's just sitting there. So that was one of the items that I've been really happy with.
Oh, and you bought a Best Tug, didn't you?
Bought a Best Tug.
Yeah. Tell us about that.
Well, I got sick and tired of throwing my shoulder out trying to start that other thing. So did, again at Oshkosh, kind of looked around and talked to people and did some research. And really what it came down to is I wanted an electric tug because it gets cold here. I mean, when I decided to buy that Best Tug was, I think, right in January when we were seeing 7, 8, 9 degrees below zero. And I went out there to try to start that stupid thing, that other tug, and.
Well, the background on that is that came with the airplane
I bought it with the airplane.
When you bought, yeah. So that was an older piece of equipment.
It was. And it worked good. I gave it away to a guy here in town. So I got this Best Tug, and this thing, oh geez, I can't remember what's the model. It's pretty cool. It's it goes up to 4,000 pounds, I think. The Saratoga max gross is 3615 on the ground. But, you'd have to have people in it and everything. But it moves right along. It's got 2 speeds. It's got one heck of a bright light that is super helpful at night. It's easy to maneuver. It's a real robust piece. The people were, I called them. It was not cheap at all. I'm trying to think. You'd have to look it up, but I think is it the A5 model? I think all said and done, it was around $4,500 new. I had looked at a couple of used ones. There weren't many in the market. There's one guy that had one on Facebook Marketplace somewhere, and I made him an offer. He wanted close enough to new that I'm like, I'd rather have new with the warranty than.
Well, I think that's the point of buying something like that has that great reputation. If something happened to you and you couldn't fly your airplane, or you won the lottery and you had a lot bigger airplane suddenly, and the two, which would be a good option, you could turn around and sell that one for probably close to what you paid for it. So
it's good.
Probably money well spent.
But you know what, Todd? Did I show you the picture? So this thing comes in, right? And the shipping company, it came in when we had that big snowstorm in January. So it was kind of a pain. But so the shipping company, we live out in the country, like you do, and we're out in a gravel road, and we're, I called these guys, the shipping company. I said, you probably are not going to want to come down our road. Well, they came down our road. So anyway, it's this big crate, and but the crate had gaps in it, and then the whole thing was wrapped with plastic. And the guy at Best Tugs told me that they do that, so you can visually inspect to make sure everything is okay right there without having to pop it open, because it's a heavy booger. I mean, it took 2 of us to load it in the back of the truck. But this thing, you open it up, it was the coolest thing. So you open up, and inside they had a helium balloon that was tied to the tug, a big thank you balloon with a great big bag of Starburst candy,
Really?
And I'm like, this is cool. Those guys, it was neat. That was a lot of fun. So that was the other item. And then the other thing I want to talk about, and a lot of guys have this anymore, but it's that switchy-on unit. And, that company's out of Kansas City here. But if you don't have one of these and you live any distance from the airport, what a great thing. So, it's a, what would you call it? A remote switching
starter.
Yeah. So I only got the 2-channel one. You can get 4. So it plugs in, and it's got 2 cables that I can plug in 2 extension cords with. So what I do is I've got one of the cables or one of the plugs hooked up to my Tannis heater. So I got an app on the phone, and I can either turn on my Tannis when I'm away, or I can set a timer on it and have it turn on at a specific time. So, we live 30, 35 minutes away from here. In the past, I'd either have to come down really early, or I'd come down the day before and turn that thing on. And then, as often as not, the weather or something else happens and you're not going. So now you got to go all the way back down to the airport and turn it off. So the switchy on, if you see it, SWITCHEON, I think. If you're looking for a really good, I know a couple guys that use them for interior heaters. They'll turn them on before, 10 or 15 minutes before they get to the airport to kind of heat up the inside of their airplane. Just all kinds of stuff. Again, 3 really quality products that I'm super happy with.
Drybot, Switchy On, and Best Tug. So there you go. Endorsed by Chris Piper.
So anyway, that's that. And now I think tired of spending money for a while.
Well, I don't mind seeing you spend money. Stop bothering me.
Well, your airplane's an annual. What are we going to do with it?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's an annual right now. Hopefully that's about done pretty darn soon. I'm ready to go flying. Nice weather here. So, well, that was an interesting update on the Saratoga. It's such a nice airplane, and you certainly utilize it in a manner that I think most general aviation people would appreciate, taking it places and taking your family on vacation, using it for business listings with Wild Blue, and gives you the capability to go look at an airplane in person. A lot of brokers would just say, hey, send me some pictures. So
yeah, it works out well for that. And, you've had the opportunity to fly in it, and shoot, you're on the insurance. You need to go fly it more.
Oh, let's go. I keep you awake, maybe, I don't know, or let you sleep, one or the other.
So it's only money. I've got a couple quotes out there for a panel redo.
Yeah.
And those are eye-opening. Mm-hmm. So that'll be sometime down the road, I think.
We missed the boat. We should have done everything in about 2017.
That's exactly right.
Yep.
That's exactly right.
Well, thanks for the update. And everyone, thank you for listening. If you've enjoyed it, considering like and subscribe to the podcast. Or look us up online at www.flywildblue.com.
Thanks for listening to the Wild Blue Podcast. Find us online at flywildblue.com. And don't forget to subscribe and share.